October 15, 2025, 8:42 a.m. A $400 million Russian submarine was heading for the Kronstadt repair base near St. Petersburg. Everything seemed routine. This was one of Russia's most mysterious and feared vessels, a Project 636.3 Kilo class, nicknamed by NATO the Black Hole. It was the final, most dangerous leg of a journey stretching thousands of kilometers. After clearing Denmark's Great Belt Strait, the submarine entered the narrow waters of the Kattegat between Denmark and Sweden, but it wasn't submerged. It was being towed on the surface by the Russian tug Yakov Grabsky, a 2,350-ton giant limping home. Hours from safety, the captain believed the worst was behind him. He was wrong. It started with two dots, tiny, distant, harmless. At first, the crew thought they were birds. Then came the sound, a low growl that turned into a roar. Then a scream faster than sound itself, just 39. Gripen multi-role fighters, Sweden's newest generation interceptors, broke through the mist like silver blades. Their arrival wasn't just fast. It was surgical, radar cross-sections minimal, infrared signatures reduced. They came in low and quiet until the last second, then detonated the air above the Russian convoy. Captain Volkov didn't even look up. The submarine's radar had been dead for 3 days. Its navigation computer had failed somewhere west of Denmark. Even the periscope. The sub's one remaining eye was jammed. The black hole was blind. At Ronneby Air Base, home of Sweden's F-17 wing, the Gripens had taken off minutes earlier. Their mission wasn't to attack, not yet. It was to watch, record, and dominate. The lead pilot, Major Elias Bergstrom, saw the Russian convoy first. The crippled sub chained to its tug like a prisoner. He keyed the comms. Visual on target. Black hole confirmed. Running surface tow. No escort warships. The Swedish command center answered coldly. Maintain distance. Sweep all frequencies. Record everything. As the jets roared overhead, one dropped to sea level. So low it skimmed the tops of the waves. It passed just 20 meters over the submarine's deck. The sonic boom slammed into the hull like a hammer. Inside, lights flickered. Meters shattered. Sailors covered their ears. It wasn't a greeting. It was a declaration. You're not invisible anymore. Dominance established. The Kilo-class submarine was once the jewel of Russia's underwater fleet, a weapon of quiet death. It could slip through NATO waters undetected, fire caliber cruise missiles with surgical precision, and vanish again before anyone knew where the strike had come from. It was engineered for stealth and pride. Now, it was a drifting corpse. Inside, the air stank of diesel and burnt plastic. Half the lighting circuits had failed. Condensation dripped from pipes, forming greasy puddles on the deck. "Report!" the captain shouted. "Main batteries at 7%, sir. Cooling systems offline. Seal compartment 5. The wiring's shorting again." 10 critical systems had failed. 2 crewmen had collapsed from heat exhaustion. Another had a fractured arm after being thrown against a bulkhead during the tow. The Novorossiysk was supposed to be a hunter. Now it was a floating coffin. 80 men trapped inside steel walls 73 meters long. And the one thing they couldn't do, the thing that defined a submarine, was dive. Because if they did, the damaged ballast tanks could rupture, the cracked hull could implode, and the submarine, along with everyone inside, would vaporize under pressure, so they stayed on the surface, visible, vulnerable, like a ghost ship being escorted to its grave. 15 minutes after the Gripen's low pass, alarms rang across Karlskrona Naval Base on Sweden's southern coast. 2 ships were dispatched immediately, HMS Karlstad and HMS Nyköping, both Visby-class stealth corvettes. To NATO, these ships were legends in their own right, invisible to radar, shaped from carbon fiber composite, and built to fight in the maze-like waters of the Baltic archipelago. They could move at 35 knots, armed with 57mm Bofors guns RBS-15 anti-ship missiles, and Torped-47 lightweight torpedoes. They weren't sent to escort. They were sent to interrogate. As the corvettes approached, the Baltic fog parted around them like curtains. The Russian tug's radar couldn't pick them up until they were barely 6 kilometers away. By then, the Swedish ships had already locked every sensor onto the sub. High-frequency sonar pings slammed into the hull, not for detection but for mapping. They read every rivet, every weld line, every cavity. The acoustic reflection built a perfect 3D scan of the submarine's hull integrity. Inside the Swedish operations room, digital models flickered to life. "We're inside their secrets," said one technician. "Every vibration, every frequency, we're pulling it all." The Russian sailors could feel the sonar pulses like heartbeats through the metal. They knew exactly what was happening. They were being dissected alive. The 57mm guns on the corvettes locked onto the sub's sail, the conning tower, not to fire but to remind them. One wrong move, and the next ping wouldn't be sonar. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a siege at sea. Above the scene, another player entered the game, a Saab 340B maritime patrol aircraft, circling silently at 6,000 meters. Its role, not to attack, but to steal everything the Russians had left. Equipped with SIGINT pods, ESM arrays, and synthetic aperture radar, it began listening to every whisper from the convoy. Engine noise, internal comms frequencies, even the resonance of the tug's towing cable. The Gripen fighters, meanwhile, deployed their Orexis electronic warfare pods. They absorbed the electromagnetic spectrum around the submarine like a sponge, collecting radar reflections, radio bursts, and encrypted communication attempts. At the same time, their PS-05A Mk4 ASA radars scanned the sub with atom-level precision. The Skyward GIRST sensors read the sub's heat emissions, even the cavitation trail, the microscopic bubbles left by the sub's damaged propeller, was recorded. Every vibration, every hum, every thermal pattern was captured, catalogued, and transmitted. To NATO's analysts, this was gold. They now had the acoustic fingerprint of one of Russia's most advanced submarines. From this moment onward, any Kilo-class vessel anywhere in the world could be identified instantly by sound alone. The operation wasn't an accident. It was a digital robbery in broad daylight, conducted over international waters under full legal cover, and in front of the Russian Navy's own eyes, and there was nothing they could do. For 6 hours, the Russian convoy crawled through the Baltic, its pace reduced to a humiliating 5 knots. Every wake ripple from the Swedish corvettes mirrored its motion. Tight, close, intentional. The tug Yakov Grabski tried to maintain radio silence, but the electromagnetic spectrum around them was saturated with Swedish interference. Encrypted frequencies jammed, GPS spoofed. Even the Russian emergency beacon system began misreporting their coordinates, showing them drifting in circles. Inside the sub, the crew had gone from tense to silent. Men sat strapped in their stations, staring at dead consoles, the only sound the occasional groan of steel as waves slapped the hull. One sailor muttered, "We were the pride of the fleet. Now we're cargo." The captain didn't respond. He just kept watching the gray surface ahead. On the Swedish corvettes, officers monitored every decibel. The Karlstad's Combat Information Center glowed blue with digital overlays, sonar readings, temperature layers, electrostatic trails. A technician whispered to his commander, "Sir, the sub's auxiliary generator emits at 312 Hz. Distinct pattern. We've got its identity nailed." "Good," replied the officer. "Record it. Every sound today rewrites tomorrow's war." And it did. That afternoon, Sweden, Denmark, and Germany all received identical encrypted data packets from Karlskrona Naval HQ. Inside, terabytes of sensor logs, the complete electronic, acoustic, and magnetic signature of the Project 636-3 class. By sunset, the data was already mirrored at NATO's Maritime Command Center in Northwood, UK. The Novorossiysk's humiliation was global before it even reached Russian waters. By nightfall, the corvettes withdrew, their mission complete. The Saab 340 patrol plane made a final pass, its cameras zooming tight on the sub's blackened hull. A faint metallic hiss echoed across the sea, the sound of pressurized fuel leaking through fractured seams. Then the skies fell silent. For the Russian sailors, that silence wasn't relief. It was the sound of defeat. Captain Volkov stood in the control room, staring at the peeling paint and dim red lights. He understood something terrible. They hadn't just lost a submarine. They had handed NATO the death warrant for the entire Kilo fleet. To understand the trap that caught them, you have to go back. Back to February 24, 2022, when Russia's invasion of Ukraine reshaped Europe's map overnight. The war meant to push NATO back instead dragged it forward, right up to Russia's doorstep. Finland joined the alliance. Sweden followed. Together, they turned the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake. Kaliningrad, once Russia's forward bastion, became a fortress under siege, surrounded by NATO airspace. And the only way in or out for Russia's Baltic fleet was through the Danish Straits, the narrow choke point of Great Belt and Öresund. Waters now patrolled 24/7 by NATO aircraft, sonar nets, and satellite constellations. The Novorossiysk was the first large Russian vessel to attempt that passage since Sweden's accession. Its journey was meant to show defiance. Instead, it revealed weakness. At the NATO Joint Maritime Analysis Center in Brussels, the incident was replayed frame by frame. Each Swedish radar return, each sonar ping, each electronic trace was synchronized and compiled into a single, unified model. Analysts joked it was the autopsy of a legend. The Baltic, once Russia's strategic backyard, was now a transparent aquarium. Every movement logged, tracked, and cataloged in real time. For Sweden, there was something poetic about it, a cycle completing itself. 44 years earlier, in 1981, the Soviet submarine U-137 had run aground on the rocks near Karlskrona in what came to be known as the Whiskey on the Rocks incident. Back then, Sweden was a neutral country, but the humiliation of a Soviet sub stranded on its coast became a national wound. Now, history had reversed. Once it was Sweden's turn to be violated by a Russian submarine. Now it was Sweden dissecting one of Russia's most secret war machines, and doing it under the full protection of NATO law. For every Swedish officer watching the crippled Kilo-class drift through their waters, it felt less like a mission and more like justice delayed. The chain of failure started thousands of kilometers away. On October 9th, deep in the Mediterranean Sea, the Novorossiysk suffered its first major malfunction. A small coolant leak in the forward reactor control system triggered a cascade of short circuits. Electrical insulation burned away, releasing toxic fumes that forced the crew to ventilate compartments, breaking stealth. When the sub surfaced to purge the air, its thermal signature lit up like a beacon on NATO satellites. Within minutes, a French FREMM frigate, FS Provence, detected it. The French command didn't hesitate. They shadowed the sub at a safe distance, gathering ELIN data and taking high-resolution imagery. Those images, the once invisible black hole floating helplessly in sunlight, were transmitted straight to NATO's intelligence grid. Within 12 hours, the images went viral. Memes, tweets, and news headlines mocked the once mighty Russian Navy. One NATO Twitter account posted a photo with the caption, "This isn't the hunt for Red October. It's find the nearest repair shop." By the time the Novorossiysk limped past the Strait of Gibraltar, the world knew its name and its shame. The British Royal Navy's HMS Portland joined the escort in the Bay of Biscay, then Belgium's Leopold I, followed by Dutch and German surveillance aircraft as the sub crept north. Each nation added another layer of sensors: radar, sonar, infrared, until the entire NATO network had a complete living fingerprint of the vessel. By the time it reached Denmark, Sweden was already waiting. Crossing into the Kattegat Strait, the Novorossiysk entered what Russian sailors call the Gray Corridor. Narrow, shallow waters surrounded by enemy sensors. It's a place where stealth means nothing, and geography itself is a weapon. Every buoy, every fishing trawler, every wind farm pylon in the strait was equipped with passive sonar hydrophones linked to NATO's integrated maritime network. As the sub passed, hundreds of tiny nodes recorded the echoes of its towline and propeller drag, forming a complete acoustic track, kilometer by kilometer. The Swedes didn't have to chase the sub. They watched it glide through their ocean like a slow-moving X-ray, and when the Gripens appeared above the mist, it wasn't random. Their intercept vectors had been plotted 2 hours earlier, guided by NATO's real-time data link system. It was the most sophisticated trap the Baltic had ever seen, and the Russians sailed right into it. At the Russian Navy headquarters in St. Petersburg, news of the encounter arrived in fragments. Radar sightings, intercepted communications, media leaks. By the time Admiral Nikolai Yevmenov, commander of the Russian Navy, received a full briefing, the world already knew what had happened. He slammed his fist against the table. They humiliated us in the Mediterranean and now in our own sea. But there was nothing he could do. The Baltic fleet was trapped, its surface ships confined, its subs exposed. Sending reinforcements would only reveal more assets to NATO sensors. Internally, a quiet panic spread through Russia's naval command. The black hole was no longer invisible, and if NATO could track one, it could track them all. The illusion of stealth, the pride of Russian submarine engineering, was gone. What NATO had hunted that day was not a submarine, it was an illusion. The illusion of Russian invincibility. The illusion that the Kremlin's navy still ruled its near waters. The illusion that time hadn't moved on since the Cold War. The Novorossiysk didn't just lose its propulsion, it lost its purpose. Its failure echoed far beyond the Baltic, to the Pacific, to the Black Sea, to every Russian admiral who still believed in legends. Technology had outrun myth. AI-driven sonar, networked radar, and real-time geospatial intelligence had turned the oceans transparent, and in that clarity, Russia's greatest shadow weapon had nowhere left to hide. When the sub finally reached Kronstadt 3 days later, its crew stepped ashore silently. No ceremony, no salute, just exhaustion and shame. One officer whispered as he looked back at the docked wreck, "We weren't defeated by enemies. We were defeated by time." This was not a battle. There were no missiles, no torpedoes, no explosions. Only silence, and the slow, surgical death of a legend. The Baltic didn't just swallow a submarine, it crowned a new power. Sweden had avenged its history, NATO had rewritten naval warfare, and Russia's black hole had imploded, not in the deep, but under the weight of its own myth.